Last week, we started a new series of messages titled The 7 Laws of the Harvest. And today, we get to hear from a guy who is part of the harvest legacy. About 4 years ago, we actually sowed, if you will, a guy named Adam Hushka, who had been on our staff basically from the beginnings of Harvest. And Adam had a call to go to Helena and start a new church there, and so we kind of put him there, funded that, and we get to hear today about how we're able to now reap what that harvest looks like. So would you do me a favor and welcome Adam Hushka to this stage?
Thanks, George. Hi, it is fantastic to be back with you. I told them that they're already limiting my pacing space, so I needed to move this back a little bit. So if at some point this morning you have this thought of, boy, he seems nervous, the answer to that question is yes. It's really thrilling to be back here and humbling, and at the same time puts a lot in perspective, so thanks. As I was anticipating this weekend, what I was anticipating as I was just kind of processing it was that I would be in a familiar room surrounded by a lot of unfamiliar people. And I mean that in the most positive sense, because what I know about this place is that it's a place of dynamic growth and leadership. And so I knew that though I've only been gone for 4 years, lots will have changed. And so with that in mind, it just feels a little bit appropriate, though, when someone says, like, in case you don't know who I am, like because I'm kind of a big deal, right? Like, I don't mean it like that at all. But a little bit of context seems like it may be appropriate. So as George said, as recently as 4 years ago, I was on staff here at Harvest, which was an absolute privilege. And at that time, I was leading a 20-something ministry that we called Mosaic. It met in what was more or less a club in downtown Billings. And in that experience, what was born was an ecclesiology and really a way of wrestling with, a way of how to be the church that led to Harvest and Journey, of course, another daughter church of this place in Bozeman, along with the Western Conference that we're all part of, in inviting me and about 30 people from Mosaic to move to Helena and start a church. A church that's since come to be called Narrate, and it has been an absolute thrill. Prior to that, I did have the opportunity to start the high school ministry here, but that's probably giving me too much credit, because really the guy who started the student ministry here was a guy named John Switzer, and he was here from the very beginning, and I showed up 6 or 7 months later and was just able to stand on his shoulders, and he was pouring into junior high students and begin to build something with the high school students. And the way that I ended up in that spot was prior to that, in what was Vern's final year of being the youth pastor at Faith E. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I was his intern. So that's kind of what gets me here, or at least that's the relational connection and the history for those of you that are kind of new to this place. Let me also say, if you are completely new to this place, Vern is fantastic, and so you should not hold this weekend against him. You should come back next week and give him his own hearing. This last, I suppose, late winter, as is the case with all of us who organize weekend experiences, I was working on the summer teaching calendar, and it occurred to me that it had been a couple years since Vern had been to Narrate. And our council a couple years ago made this observation that it would be really helpful to the people in Helena just to hear from Vern, to hear from Brian and Journey. Obviously, there's lots of DNA and lots of similarity and just a lot of context that would come with that. And so in the summer of 2011, Vern did come to Narrate, and it was absolutely awesome. You know that experience when you introduce two people who, really well, but they don't know each other? You know that experience, and you're just like, I just can't wait for you to meet each other. That's what it's like, which is why, as fun as it is to be here this morning, I'm really envious of the people that are in Helena this morning, because Vern's there, and it's just so neat to see those connections made. So with that in mind, I thought, this summer would probably be appropriate to bring Brian and Vern back. And so I emailed each of them, and Vern emailed me back a couple weeks later and said, oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. How about we switch? And I thought, that sounds like a terrible idea. because Narrate gets you and Harvest is stuck with me. And I said, the sense of, inferiority set in immediately. And I was like, what would I have to say? And he said, well, what if you were just to talk about the adventures that have comprised the Narrate story? Like tell the story really with the purpose being to inspire Harvest, to inspire you into more kingdom-sized stories. And as I began to think in those terms and began to contemplate all that we've experienced over the last 4 years, all that we hope to experience in the future, all of our successes, all of our failures, really one principle, I suppose you could call it, one idea, this kind of elevated to the surface almost instantaneously. And so that's really what I'd like to explore this morning. First, though, I need to point out some of you are the types of people that whatever you touch, it turns to gold. Do you know what I'm talking about? And in fact, if you are one of those, you don't know that you're with one of those, but you don't know that you're one of those, but you know it if you're with one of those, you know? Like you've been golfing for 10 years and then they took up golf and beat you a month later. Those types of people. That happened to me last week. I had a good friend, and my family and I, we've been golfing a lot this summer. Our boys are finally old enough to do that, and so we've been doing that about once a week. And then I took this friend of mine out who's one of those, like, whatever he touches turns to gold guys, and I was just kicking his butt for the first 9 holes, and I ended up losing by 6 or 7, I don't know what you call it in golf, strokes. But so some of you are that type of person, right? Like whatever you touch, it turns to gold. There's something that the rest of us would like you to know, and that is we hate you. You raise up within us our inferiority complex and our insecurity, because it feels to us like we work really hard to become average. It feels to us like we're relegated to just being okay. Like we're not looking for a six-pack on our stomach. We're just looking for a flat stomach, right? Like we decided that we're going to start running, and it takes us 8 months to get to 10, or 8 years to get to 10 miles. You decide you're going to start running, and you ran a marathon a week later. So that's hard for us to cope with you. And really this morning, the principle that we're going to talk about, in all honesty, it's mostly for those of us who feel really average. Most of us that really feel relegated to mediocrity. And really what I'm hoping happens this morning is from the story of Narrate, that what can rise up within you are some handles, that you don't feel such a victim of your skill set, that you don't have to feel so insecure, that actually what I'm hoping is you leave with some really clear action steps as to how you can fulfill some of the dreams and visions and ideas that you have, no matter how big or small they are. And I'm hoping that you leave feeling really empowered, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And for those of you that are those types of people, again, if you are, you probably don't self-identify as one. And if you do, well, then you're an egotist. But maybe you have accomplished something. Like you've had some major successes, maybe in your spiritual life, maybe in your financial life, maybe in your physical life, maybe in your business life, and maybe you're looking at another one, and suddenly you're petrified, and you've never felt that before, and you're not sure if it's worth risking your past successes and putting your whole identity back on the line again, because this time you could lose it all. And actually, what I'm going to talk about this morning, as we talk about it, you're going to go, oh yeah, I knew that. But what I'm hoping for you, if nothing else, is that you'll be reminded of something that you already know. And once again, we'll actually see in a little more honest terms what led to the last successes that you've experienced. Now, to be sure, that this idea that we're going to talk about this morning is one that I could not appreciate prior to moving to Helena 4 years ago. And that's part of what makes it appropriate, I think, to share this morning. Because prior to moving to Helena back in 2009, I had really experienced 3 church cultures. Really, especially since getting serious about following Jesus in my late teens, I'd really only experienced 3 different churches. And as I talk about them, you'll go, well, that's not fair because you experienced church at its best. I didn't know that at the time. See, my first church experience was at Faith Chapel. When I was a junior in high school, I suppose that was about 1995 or 1996. It's not that I don't remember what year I graduated, it's that I don't remember what side of January I started going to Faith Chapel on. I started going to Faith Chapel's midweek service, and I wasn't going because I suddenly had this newfound interest in Jesus. I was going because I had a newfound interest in the person that I was going with, and her parents made her go. And so I sat in the back row of what many of us know to be a fabulous church, and initially I was taken back. I was raised Catholic, and I remember thinking, where's the crucifix? And I was struggling with some of these, what I now understand were pretty trivial things. But I was also quickly blown away. And before long, I found myself inviting friends and family, not even because I necessarily wanted them to meet Jesus, but because I just wanted them to come experience this remarkable worship service. And over time, what I began to know was that if you didn't get there early, you didn't get a parking spot. And when you walked in the door, the people were friendly, and they weren't creepy, like they didn't kiss you on the cheek, but they were friendly. And when you walked into the auditorium, if you weren't careful, you weren't going to find a seat, especially during the fall and the winter and the spring. And what I knew was that the music was absolutely incredible, and the preaching, Stan Simmons, one of the best ever, right? It was incredible. My second church experience then was really just shortly after that and kind of overlaps that, and that was really the student ministries at Faith Evangelical, the mother church of this place. That was that year I was an intern under Vern in what was his final year as the youth pastor as preparations were being made to plant this church up here in the Heights. And what I experienced among the students at Faith E blew me away. Like, what you have to understand is my second youth group ever was my first day on the job. Like, the first time I'd ever experienced youth group in my life was when I went there to figure out what it would look like to be an intern there. So I had no concept of student ministry. It was not a part of my high school experience. And what I experienced that year, which was the graduation year of 2000, it was insane. On any given Wednesday, there'd be 150, 200, 250 students there. And they weren't drugged there by their earlobes, like they wanted to be there. And it wasn't just one particular class of students, the whole spectrum was represented. And the music was incredible. And of course, Vern's teaching was absolutely phenomenal. And he'd do this nerdy stuff that students loved. Like, I don't know if he's ever done this here, but he'd do this thing where he'd hold up his Bible and he'd say, "Hey, Vern, I brought my Bible." And he'd have the whole place like in a ruckus, like screaming, "I brought my Bible." And you'd have these otherwise cool, hip high school students enthusiastically holding their Bibles in the air and chanting how they brought their Bible to church that Wednesday. It was awesome. And yet at the same time, it wasn't shallow. The teaching was good from Vern, obviously, you know that. But it also hit right at the heart of some of the issues. And the team that worked there, they weren't just talking about trivial stuff in their small groups. It was real stuff. And when there was a ski retreat, like it would sell out. We'd have to charter extra buses. Super Summer, the summer camp, that there was always a waiting list. In fact, I remember, I think it was kind of Vern's parting farewell, but we did this thing called mud football, and it was at the Anderbergs nursery, and for days they just flooded this giant field with water, and it was mud up to your knees, and hundreds of high school students showed up and just played football in the mud, and nobody broke their leg off at the knee. It was incredible. Again, so I had this really, really great view of church. The third experience I had at church before I left was right here. I watched, as many of you did, a church go from 0 to 1,000 people in months. And it's not about numbers. We were also watching lots of people, some of you are them, give their lives to Jesus, coming to church for the very first time. And even early in the harvest experience, within the first year or so, we weren't talking about like how do we get people to actually want to come to a Sunday experience. We were talking about like where can we get more chairs? And we've got kids' classrooms in the hallways at Skyview. Like, what are we going to do about that? And within 5 years, if my memory serves me right, we had built this multi-million-dollar facility. And as I look back now, I had absolutely no appreciation for what led to the success of places like Faith Chapel and the student ministry at Faith E and the start of this place. And it's kind of what I want to mess with this morning. But before we do that, let's, if I can meddle with your stuff a little bit. Like, how about you? What are your dreams? Because I know you're like me. We're all the same. We lay in bed at night. We go for long drives. We go for runs. We daydream. We find ourselves in those moments, and we're dreaming about things. We're imagining things for our marriage, imagining things for the dynamics of our home, imagining getting out of debt, imagining losing 100 pounds, imagining growing spiritually mature. Like we imagine starting a business that maybe actually could lead to the dream job that allows me to quit my day job. Like you're like me and I'm like you. We all dream things. So let me ask you this. How do you go about realizing those dreams? Like, what's the plan? What's the strategy? Because here's what I've observed. And that is, we live, it sounds so arrogant. Here's what I've observed. I don't mean it like that at all. But we've all observed this. Like, we live in a culture that idolizes quick and easy success, don't we? This last week was kind of a historic day if you're a Major League Baseball fan, which statistically would make 3 of you. We watched some very famous athletes once again get tagged with a PED label. Once again, it be found out, surprising to nobody, that professional athletes are doing whatever they can to cheat and get multi-million-dollar contracts. And in a sense, there's this public outcry that rises up. And people like Alex Rodriguez, who just moments ago were a darling to us, suddenly become public enemy number 1. But is it fair? Like, is it just professional athletes that crave instant and easy success? Is it any different in the business world? For some of you, isn't the reason why you roll your eyes when your boss says he's going to another conference because you understand what that leads to is your boss is going to come home and he's going to start talking about how he heard this one idea or there's this one new program or there's this one new product, and because he just learned about this product, when you institute it into the organization, suddenly everything's going to be different, and your financial picture and the workplace respect and fulfillment is going to suddenly do a complete 180, and you roll your eyes and you think, yeah, whatever. We've been down so many roads where we were just one idea away and the one idea never translated. And even in our own personal business lives, isn't one of the great dangers of studying leadership, which like you, I thoroughly enjoy, but isn't the great danger that we would be looking for the one thing, the one idea that if we implemented it, suddenly it'd be a game changer. And we're not talking suddenly like 6 years from now, we're talking suddenly tomorrow morning. And even in our own personal lives, doesn't this creep in? Like, as we think about the things that we struggle with and wonder if we'll ever get rid of them, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, the addictions, don't we have this sense that there must be a book, a idea, a something to read, a something to listen to, a something to do? We'd stand on our heads if that's what we had to do, but something that would quickly, suddenly, instantly eradicate our problem. I think it's also prevalent within the church, among well-intentioned places like this. I've caught myself in it because we talk about things called spiritual gifts, and certainly Paul talked a lot about spiritual gifts in the New Testament, but don't we often talk about spiritual gifts in a manner that says, if you can figure out what your spiritual gift is, you will quickly, instantly become great at it. Isn't the implication in the church as we talk about things is that the reason the musicians are so good isn't because they worked really hard to become good, but because it's their spiritual gift, and so they just picked up a guitar and it was like magic. Don't we crave instant success? And it leads me to this observation that dates me a little bit, but it reminds me of Kevin Costner in that now corny, but at the time incredible movie called Field of Dreams. And what was and if you're younger than me, you're like, what are you talking about? There's this guy, Kevin Costner, and he heard voices, and he made a baseball field out of the cornfields, and it sounds psychotic, but it was popular at the time. But what was the message of that movie? Wasn't it that the dream leads to the dream? That all you got to do is dream it, and it happens. And ultimately, I guess I want to ask this question: what if that's not true? What if it's the daily that leads to the dream? What if in our pursuit of the dream, we often get so caught up in the dream, the becoming a millionaire, the losing weight, the getting out of debt, the growing spiritually mature, the business goals? What if in the pursuit of the dream, we often forget that the way the dream is realized is in the daily grind? And as I began to unpack this a couple years ago in my own experience, as we were understanding what was happening around Narrate, what quickly popped out to me was that this is a central message from one cover of the Bible to the other. That as God talked to his people in different times and different places over thousands of years, his message was pretty consistent. And it sounded something like, I can do the miraculous. I am so powerful and so in control that should I want to, I can instantaneously do something that might otherwise take thousands of years, or in the lives of individuals, years and decades. But it's not the norm, is it? In fact, what you observe is it's far from the norm. That God, for whatever reason, yes, he can pray you can have one prayer prayed over you and your anger can go away, but for every one story like that, there's 99 of people who had to slog it out over years. In fact, one of the places that stands out to me where God just repeats this over and over again is in the book of Proverbs. And in your own time, you could Google the idea of diligence in Proverbs and find a plethora of really encouraging/discouraging, it depends on your perspective, Proverbs on this idea. But Proverbs, for those of you that aren't aware, Proverbs, of course, is a book of ancient wisdom comprised mostly by a guy named Solomon, and the great warning there is Solomon is the smartest man to ever live other than Jesus, and yet his life was a wreck. And so it's a reminder that we can wax eloquent, but it doesn't necessarily translate to anything. But listen to 13:4. He says this: a sluggard's appetite is never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. Now, this challenges the way I classify lazy people. Because is this proverb suggesting that some people have visions, and some people have dreams, and some people have aspirations and others don't? No. It's not. I mean, you could ask the question, do sluggards, do lazy people, to those who don't realize their dreams, do they have dreams? Do they have vision? Do they have ideas? Do they lay in bed at night? Do they go for long drives? Do they find themselves on runs and suddenly they're imagining things? Do they have those moments? And the answer, of course, is yes, they do. So what separates one from the other, the sluggard from the one who actually realizes dream? We live in a time, I think, where we radically celebrate the visionary leader. And don't get me wrong, I think some have more of that than others. I think your leader here has more of it than most anybody I know, Vern. But are there some people, or let me ask it this way, is the issue here that some have vision and others don't? No. What's the issue, according to Solomon? It's diligence. And see, diligence is boring because diligence is monotonous, because diligence requires effort. It doesn't just require having a mountaintop experience. It involves slogging it out in the valley, in the monotony, in the mundane, in the boring moments. In Proverbs 10:4, there's a similar proverb where it says this, it says, lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. Dave Ramsey, I'm a fan of his. I love listening to his podcast, and the way he defines diligence is this. He says, diligence is excellence in the ordinary. Excellence in the ordinary. See, the Proverbs, when we ask this question of what if it's the day that leads to the dream, the Proverbs, they use this word diligence. I think Jesus uses the word faithfulness because Jesus was someone with dreams. His dreams were for the whole world, which are pretty big dreams. Can we agree? And how did he go about accomplishing those dreams? Did he march down to Jerusalem and find the biggest chair he could find and say, there is no king but me? Did he get on a ship and sail to Rome and walk up to Caesar and say to Caesar, there is no Caesar but me? No, that's the way Solomon did things, instantly. That's how Solomon wanted things done. What did Jesus do? Well, he went to Nazareth. He started in Nazareth. He eventually moved just a few miles away to the Sea of Galilee, and he called disciples, and he poured into people, and he built relationships, and he helped, and he healed, and he listened, and he observed, and he did kingdom living daily, one step at a time. And isn't it amazing to think that in this room right now, that there are hundreds of people who are here in the name of Jesus, but Jesus didn't ever write a book. He didn't ever erect a building in his honor. In fact, he didn't ever really stray more than about 50 miles from his home. And yet you're here today because 2,000 years ago, a man, and many of us believe to be God, Jesus, he lived a certain way and influenced others. See, it took 2,000 years to reach you. Jesus, one of the ways that he teaches this, there's a principle that he unpacks in a couple different occasions. One involves the issue of money. The other involves the issue of talents. And this is where we kind of cut at, right, what many of us feel. Because in some sense, Jesus does affirm that some of us are just a little more talented than others. He talks about 5 and 10 and 1 talent people, or 5 and 2 and 1 talent people. He talks about some of us just have more to work with. And we can kick and scream and pout and we can speculate which ones we are, or we can do what he says. And in commending one of them, he simply says this, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. It's not a celebration of the quick and easy. It's not a celebration of good job. You had this giant project and you were faithful with it. It's a celebration of the grind, isn't it? So the Proverbs, they call it diligence. Jesus calls it faithfulness. Some authors call it grit. Jim Collins has this remarkable statement where he says, the signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency. Mathematicians, they call it compound interest, don't they? And anybody who understands compound interest will tell you it's one of the, if not the most powerful forces on the earth. In fact, in his book, Great by Choice, If you were to ask me what's been the best book that I've read in the last 4 years, I wouldn't even hesitate. It's definitely been great by choice. I highly recommend it. It unpacks this principle in some remarkable ways. But Jim Collins tells a story in there about two individuals, two explorers, who in October of 1911 were both making final preparations for a journey to be the first people in the modern era to reach the South Pole. Both of them were pretty, the stakes were, they were pretty equally matched. One was 39, one was 43. One of their last names was Amundsen, the other's last name was Scott. Each had the respect and the support of their respective empires. Each had tons and tons of resources available to them, incredible experience behind them. The trek, by the way, would be 700 miles one way to the South Pole. No GPS, no radio, no like, tap, tap, I'm out, come get me with a helicopter, none of that. And yet what's remarkable is each group of men, they left within just a couple days of each other. One group would get to the South Pole, I think it was 34 days before the other group, and would actually arrive back home, so would have covered 1,400 miles with dogs and sleds and things like that. They would arrive back home the exact day that they speculated they would arrive back home. The other group, of course, arrived at the South Pole and was incredibly discouraged to find that not only were they beat there, but they were beat there by over a month. And when they turned around and started heading back for home, suddenly they realized that they had a new battle on their hands. It was a battle for their very lives, and it would eventually be a battle they lost. They were found the following spring, frozen to death, 8 miles from their closest outpost. Now, one of the observations that historians have made, when you ask the question, why was some group, one team so incredibly successful while the other died, one of the observation involves their approach. See, one of those groups, they decided that they would move as many miles in any given day as the conditions said they should. So, of course, we're talking in relative terms now because we're talking about weather in Antarctica. But when the weather was good, they decided that they would go 20, 30, even 40 miles in a day. And when the weather was terrible, that there would be, you can read about it in their journals, there would be days where they didn't even leave their tents. The other group, they decided that no matter what the conditions were doing, they were going 20 miles. Whether the weather was good, whether the weather was terrible, whether they reached their 20-mile mark and they still had hours and hours and lots of energy left or not, they went 20 miles. Sometimes they went a lot longer. The days were a lot longer than they should have been. Some days they were much shorter. In fact, this group, there was actually almost a mutiny amongst his team as they got close to the South Pole because they were coming at it from angles, so they didn't necessarily know where the other team was in relationship to the race to the pole. And at one point, they knew they were getting pretty close to the pole. They didn't have the privileges and the benefits of GPS, so they didn't have precise data, but they knew they were getting close, and the weather was perfect. And their leader, he stopped them at 20 miles. And their team, the team, was furious that they just put their lives on the line, that they'd put all this into it, and now they risked losing the race because their leader had this stupid rule. Now, let me ask you this. What group do you suppose won? What group do you suppose is the one that lived through this adventure? It's the 20-mile marchers. See, Jesus calls it faithfulness. The Proverbs call it diligence. But what if it's the daily that leads to the dream? What if you're not relegated to mediocrity? What if the difference between the success you want to experience and the success you have experienced isn't so much your ability or your skill or anything like that, it's just the monotony. It's the ethic, the work ethic. It's the grind, it's the grit, it's the fortitude or the lack thereof. See, as I look back, what I experienced in the mid-90s at Faith Chapel most certainly was church done, in my estimation, at its best. But what I had absolutely no appreciation for was that the guy standing there, Stan, who was an incredible speaker, he had been mastering his craft for decades. That when I showed up, that place, that group, that community, they had been learning how to serve people and create Sunday experiences for decades. And yeah, it looked to me like I just walked in and like, woo, you figured this out, you're geniuses. That's not the case at all. That it had been a slow grind for them too. And slowly over time led to their success. And as I look back and think about my experience at Faith E, it sure felt to me like all Vern had to do was raise a flag in the air and students would have flocked there, like bad pizza and Mountain Dew, and boom, they'd be there. but my own experience and yours tells me it's not true. And what I realize now is that I showed up in Vern's 10th year of student ministry. He'd been learning how to lead. He'd been learning how to create experiences. And that doesn't even mention all the background and all the years of experience and training into him. And we haven't even talked about his team yet and all that went into them and their own respective stories. And the fact that Faith E is a church who long before Vern showed up had already demonstrated a commitment to student ministry. That he was standing on the shoulders of people who were stood on the shoulders of people. It was a much bigger story than I could appreciate. And as I think back at this place, while some would argue it to be a model of quick and easy success, I would beg to differ. That again, if you just show up in the room, and I still remember when my wife Teresa and I showed up for the first time, and we had no context for church planning, and we were picturing a few people singing Kumbaya in the Skyview the cafeteria, and it wasn't that, it was hundreds. But what I realize now is, again, that wasn't instant success, that there had been years of investment, again, in Vern. In the launch team there, you just have no idea how incredible a group of people that was. Not to mention the incredible group of people who committed to being a part of this church long before the church ever held its first service. That there's vast story and incredible work of God done behind the background. And we haven't even talked about this little church called Hawthorne yet, who for decades had been praying and wondering, how in the world is God going to do the next thing in the Heights? See, what I realized, and it took the experience in Helena to realize it, was that it's not the dream that leads to the dream. It's the grind. It's the grit. And it's not that some people can do it and others can't. It's that some people are willing to do the work and others aren't. You know what Vern's parting words to me were? That's a stupid question. Of course you don't. They were up in this, I forget what we call it, my office was up on this hallway thing up on the third floor, and I have one memory of Vern actually standing in my office in my time here, but it was this particular time. And I don't know what the context was entirely. I'm sure as a guy who was in seminary and going to grad school and getting ready to plant a church, it was full of hubris and idealistic thoughts of church and how easy it would be and things like that. But I remember him looking at me. And he said, Adam, and when I looked at him as he started to speak, his eyes were glossy. I don't think he was crying, but it was on the verge. And the context for him was that this was right in the middle of his having to hold tightly to the fact that God was telling you all and him to lead the building of a pool for the Heights. And he looked at me with glossy eyes and he said, Adam, kind of interrupting my waxing eloquent about idealist things. Adam, he said, never forget that vision is cheap. You don't even have to get out of bed to have a good idea, he said. And he went on to say things like, vision is the easy part. It's the easiest part. But realizing vision, that's work. And of course, he was feeling that in a way that was far more than an intellectual exercise than it is right now. What if it really is the daily that leads to the dream? And you know something? As we look at our measurables as a church in Helena, that they all just say this. That slowly but surely, we're not flattening off, we're getting more credibility and reaching more people and talking about, okay, now we need to add a service or find a new building. I mean, everything is doing that. But I really don't want to get into the measurables and those types of stories. I'd rather end on a personal note. How about you? Like in your life, in your marriage, in your home dynamics, in your business, in your spiritual journey, in your physical health, in your emotional health, what would it look like if you just found one area, one way to apply this? How would it be a game changer in your marriage? And I'll tell you how. It's not going to change your marriage next week. It's not going to change your marriage next month. Your marriage might be just as miserable a year from now as it is today. But over time, what if you could turn it? Like, what would it look like if you latched hold of this idea in just one area where you feel defeated, you feel discouraged, you feel relegated to average? John Maxwell has something that he calls the rule of 5. And what the rule of 5 says is that if you have a tree in your backyard and you want to chop the tree down and you decide and you commit to every day going in your backyard and hitting that tree 5 times with an axe, what is eventually going to happen? The tree's going to fall down. Now, here's where we get into talent and some things that may be outside of your control, like the size of your biceps and the weight of your axe and the sharpness of your axe and the maturity of the tree and things like that. But the question is not, will the tree fall down? It's when will the tree fall down? me put it to you like this. What if you were to figure out a rule of 5 in your marriage, in your spiritual journey, in your financial life, in your physical life? Like, what are the 3 things? We can make it metaphorical. What are the 4 things? What are the 5 things that if you were to do them every day, 10 years from now, you'd be a completely different person? You'd be in a completely different situation. And can God do his thing and miraculously do it for you? Yes, he can. But you need to know it's like playing the lottery if that's the way you're going, because it doesn't go that way very often. Often what he invites us into is a long battle towards maturity, a long battle towards getting out of debt. Yes, he can do the miraculous, but it doesn't seem to be the way it always happens. In Galatians 6:9, Paul kind of end here, I suppose. He says something that I've, over the last few months, taken tremendous encouragement from. He says this: let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And it's been pointed out to me that in that tiny sentence are 4 responsibilities. 2 of those responsibilities belong exclusively to God, and they are the harvest and the size of the harvest. That's God's responsibility. That's God's gig, as we say. But you have 2 responsibilities too, according to Paul. It's to keep doing good, to keep doing those things that God has called you to do, and to not become discouraged, to stay consistent, knowing full well that the signature of mediocrity, it's chronic inconsistency. And as a church, listen, as much as I love this place and as much as my history is built around this place, to be honest with you, I don't know what lies ahead for you. I don't know what initiatives you're working on, what challenges you have, what new ideas that you have. I know they're crazy because I know Vern. But I don't know those questions any more than you know them with regards to Narrate. But I do know what questions to ask. And as a church, it looks much the same. Like, are you still committed to the grind? Are you still committed to slogging it out? Are you still going to be willing to volunteer with kids and bands and parking lot and all to do all that's required to create experiences on Sunday and on Saturday that your unchurched friends love to attend? Are you still willing to do a lot of volunteering around here even though you already have a day job? Are you still willing to commit financially to making this possible? Are you still willing to show up at the serving opportunities in order to serve your community without agenda the way that I know you want to? Because yes, our visions are important, our dreams, our ideas, and you've got one of the best visionary leaders I know. But you know as well as I do that that's not even half the battle. It's the daily that leads to the dream. That's been what we've learned at Narrate. So if I could pray over you, I'd love to do that, and then George is going to jump up here and send us out. Lord, we're so grateful for the scriptures and the myriad stories in there that tell us of people who they were faithful. And we use the word faithful to speak often of intellectual things, of instantaneous things, of like, I believe in you, I don't believe in you. But God, I just can't help but see that in the scriptures, faithful often takes on a different tone. It involves a trust in you over the long haul. God, there are a whole bunch of issues that are dragging us down represented in this room. Personal issues and business issues and financial issues and spiritual issues. And God, there's a lot of them where we showed up and the assumption was that we just have to learn how to work around them because they're never going away. I pray that you would give us the wisdom to know how to apply the truth that the daily leads to the dream, and then the courage to do that. We sure love you, Jesus. Amen.